From labor strikes to censorship accusations, from cultural backlash to political standoffs, Disney has spent decades surrounded by controversy. Some were dismissed, some were buried, others reshaped the company entirely. But over the time, the pattern became harder to ignore. Creative decisions sparked backlash, corporate moves invited scrutiny, public responses only escalated the noise. What once felt like isolated incidents slowly turned into a constant presence, controversy following controversy across films, parks, streaming, and politics. The question isn't whether Disney has faced criticism before, it's whether the volume, frequency, and impact of these controversies reveals something deeper about how the company now operates. For decades, Disney Channel was one of the most dominant networks in youth television. Throughout the 2000s and early 2010s, its live-action and animated series regularly drew millions of viewers per episode, making it a cornerstone of Disney's media business and a reliable driver of advertising and merchandise revenue. That model depended on scheduled viewing and long-term audience habits. Streaming disrupted that system. Before the controversies became a constant in public discussions, Disney was one of the most dominant cultural forces in global entertainment. For nearly a century, its animated films and characters helped define the medium, setting standards in storytelling, technology, and audience engagement that other studios often followed rather than led. Disney Animation pioneered full-length animated features, including Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, and later the Renaissance classics like The Little Mermaid, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, and The Lion King, which became worldwide cultural touchstones and helped shape expectations for what animated storytelling could be. In the streaming era, that legacy translated into massive viewership numbers on Disney's platforms. The Mandalorian, for example, amassed billions of minutes of viewing time in its first 2 seasons alone, figures comparable to the biggest shows on any platform, and became one of the first major non-Netflix series to top Nielsen's streaming rankings.
Even outside streaming, Disney films continued to perform strongly in theaters. In 2025, the company generated more than $6 billion at the global box office, the highest total since 2019. The 2025 animated release Zootopia 2 went on to become the highest-grossing American animated film of all time, surpassing previous records and underlining Disney's ability to pull audiences worldwide.
Behind these numbers, Disney's IP, from Mickey Mouse to Marvel heroes, has not only driven movies and shows, but has shaped merchandise markets, theme parks, tourism, and even animation techniques across the industry, making the brand synonymous with family entertainment for generations. As on-demand platforms grew, linear television viewership declined across the industry. Younger audiences migrated away from cable, and Disney Channel's ratings, distribution, and relevance steadily eroded. By the late 2010s, the network was no longer positioned as a growth asset. This decline occurred before Disney Plus launched, reflecting a broader collapse of the traditional cable ecosystem. Disney Plus was introduced in 2019 as the company's solution to that problem. The service launched with rapid subscriber growth, driven by a large content library and early original programming such as The Mandalorian. Initial adoption exceeded internal projections, reinforcing the belief that streaming could replace Disney's declining television business. However, the early momentum proved difficult to sustain. Subscriber growth slowed, churn increased, and many users treated the platform as a short-term subscription rather than a long-term service. While Disney Plus attracted viewers, it did not replicate the habitual engagement that Disney Channel once generated through daily programming. As Disney's traditional television business weakened and streaming growth became less predictable, the company increasingly turned to its existing catalog as a stabilizing strategy. Rather than developing new animated franchises at the same pace, Disney prioritized reinterpretations of its most recognizable properties in live-action form. This approach was not framed as a creative experiment, but as a reliability play. These films came with established audiences, global brand awareness, and lower uncertainty compared to launching entirely new stories. In the short term, the results justified the strategy, reinforcing the belief that familiarity could substitute for innovation during a period of transition. However, as this approach became more frequent and more visible, it began to attract sustained criticism. By the early 2020s, a lot of people were tired of Disney's live-action remakes. Online comments kept saying the same thing: why does this exist? Many felt the movies looked empty, copied the originals scene for scene, and added nothing new. What once felt like an occasional update started to look like Disney recycling old stories because it didn't want to take risks. Then the changes became the real issue. Disney didn't just remake the films, they changed them. Characters were rewritten, stories were adjusted, messages were altered to fit modern ideas. Some people supported that, others didn't, and that split turned into non-stop arguments online. With Mulan, fans said Disney removed the entire point of the story, a normal girl training hard to become strong, and replaced it with a hero who was already perfect. With The Little Mermaid, people argued about casting, saying Disney was changing characters instead of creating new ones. Many online comments said, if you want new representation, write new stories. Snow White caused the biggest backlash. Fans argued Snow White was written as a pale-skinned character on purpose. It's literally part of the story. The backlash got worse when the lead actress made public comments saying the original movie was outdated, that the prince was weird, and that the remake wouldn't focus on the love story.
I know that you've told me before that your version of Snow White is different, and it's more of a 2022 version of Snow White. What did you mean by that?
I mean, you know, the original cartoon came out in 1937, and very evidently so. There is a big focus on her love story with a guy who literally stalks her.
Yeah.
Weird.
Super weird.
So we didn't do that this time.
Online reactions were brutal. Many people said she sounded disrespectful, ungrateful, and dismissive of the role itself. Some openly said her comments hurt the movie before it even released. Box office numbers reflected the damage. This backlash wasn't about one movie. It was about repetition, changes people didn't ask for, and a feeling that Disney cared more about messaging than storytelling. By the mid-2020s, the question wasn't, did these remakes make money? It was, why is Disney making them at all? Rather than directly addressing criticism about writing quality, originality, or overuse of remakes, Disney's public-facing messaging often shifted toward defending intent instead of engaging with the substance of the complaints. Trade publications like Variety and The Hollywood Reporter observed that Disney increasingly framed backlash as a misunderstanding of its goals rather than a reaction to creative choices. This approach changed the conversation. Viewers were no longer debating whether the films worked, they were debating whether criticism itself was valid. Several public figures added to the controversy. In 2022, actor Peter Dinklage criticized Disney's Snow White remake in an interview.
Literally no offense to anything. They were very proud to cast a Latino actress as Snow White. It makes no sense to me. You're progressive in one way, but you're still making that fucking backward story of 7 dwarves living in a cave. What the are you doing, man?
Disney responded by announcing major changes to how the characters would be portrayed, which led to further backlash from fans, disability advocates, and commentators who felt the studio was reacting without a clear plan. During The Little Mermaid remake, Disney publicly defended casting choices as a step toward inclusion. While many supported the decision, executives and studio representatives also condemned online criticism as racist in broad terms. Media outlets like the New York Times reported that while some backlash was clearly abusive, a significant portion of the criticism focused on Disney's reliance on remakes rather than the casting itself. The studio's response blurred that distinction, intensifying division instead of narrowing it. Leadership comments reinforced the shift. Disney CEO Bob Iger later admitted the company had moved too aggressively in recent years, stating that Disney invested too much too fast and removed accountability from key creative decisions. Although aimed largely at streaming strategy, analysts interpreted these remarks as acknowledgement that Disney's approach to content and messaging had drifted away from audience expectations. The business effects were tangible. Several live-action releases opened below projections, with weaker repeat viewership and declining merchandise performance. CNBC and The Wall Street Journal reported that controversy reduced turnout among casual and family audiences, the very group Disney historically depended on. Disney continued the strategy because remakes remained financially safer than launching new IP, but the cost was trust. Streaming pressures exposed creative strain, remakes amplified frustration, and defensive responses deepened the divide. Disney didn't collapse. It narrowed its options, and that's the position it now has to work from.